Hello, hello, hello. We are Debate Sensei. We got Tim Seavey from San Diego State University. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm on the wrong side. Hold on.
Oh,
There. That was weird. Universe was broken for a minute.
Oh man. So Matt is off. He is doing this is of Julius Caesar's assassination. So he's part of a reenactment group. So they have to do it March 15th every year. Yeah,
that's right. Beware the Ides of March. Yeah. That's
I
wonder why he had that tattooed on his somewhere.
Yeah,
I always
upper left
wondered.
cheek, right?
Yeah, I was. Now that makes a lot more sense.
Okay. All right.
So what are we talking about today? Being the third Wednesday.
Third Wednesday is theory. Third Wednesday. Third theory. Theory third Wednesday or third theory Wednesday. Third Wednesday theory. Mm-hmm. Theory third Wednesday. All right. We're talking permutations, everybody. I can't believe we haven't talked about this so far because
surprised with that too.
But on the other hand, it's one of those things in debate. It's like inside baseball a little bit. You know, it's like you have to be in it for a while, and then once you come across permutations, what it means and everything like that, you're like, oh yeah, I'm totally cool with all that lingo.
Yeah,
all the all the kids use these days.
Right. And I do remember being so mad the first time I ever had to deal with the permutation around. I was like, I'm sorry, you're just changing the plan. And so I went through like a whole, I didn't really know the procedure of it yet, but I was like, I know that you are not allowed to change your advocacy. This is a shift in the plan, and like threw a whole, weighted argument behind that of like, the government team is not allowed to change their mind after the PM. And we lost, most definitely, because the perm is totally a thing. And I just thought they were making up words and changing their position. It was like, that's cheater pants. But I don't know if it's just because I'm still bitter, or if part of me still just kind of believes that, like, I kind of think that like perms are shady and I don't like them. So like, I mean, I get it. It's a thing, but I also think that they still annoy me. And I think it's because it forces the negative team to like have to make something competitive. I don't think is necessarily like should have to be as complicated as it is. So first, I guess we'll back up. What is a perm?
Yeah. So imagine yourself, you're in a debate round, and it's a policy round. This is very much a policy theory thing. All right. And so you have to advocate a plan of some sort. And so you advocate a plan, and then the negative team comes up and they advocate a counter plan. It's when during rejoinder. Now, whether or not that's like the second affirmative, or whether or not that's just the affirmative rebuttal in a one-on-one format, it's during rejoinders is whenever I've heard it. The affirmative basically makes the argument that the counter plan does not create a forced choice between the affirmative and the negative. And so a permutation is most people like to think of it as do both, that we could do your plan and we could do the affirmative plan. And since we're doing both, then we're still winning, because in the affirmative, we said we should do this plan. In the end, we are still doing this plan plus something else. Therefore, there's no reason to vote against us.
Right. Yeah. Where I take issue with that is, so that is a very common, normal, standard part of the course thing. I take issue with it for a couple of reasons, but primarily because I feel like fiat is already this just magical wand that the government team gets to wave, that gets to grant them one policy. And then when the negative team comes up and says like, all right, well, we fiat our thing. And then somehow that just grants like an extra token, like you get an extra life on the government side, and they get to say like, oh yeah, we can do that too. I understand if it is a topical counterplan, how it's like, all right, well, that is still the topic. So the way it was described to me is like, well, if you've got the affirmative side advocating for the resolution and negative side advocating also for the resolution, solving the same harms, like possibly with the same or better solvency, then like, well, you're forced to vote between affirmative and affirmative. I've heard that as kind of part of the explanation, but I still also agree to the idea that the affirmative's ground is the resolution and everything within the resolution. Negative's ground is literally everything else. And that seems like that's maybe lopsided, especially when you get a really bad topic, which, you know, there of course are. But I also think that because the affirmative side wins something like 60 to 70% of rounds, just like across all, you know, levels, all regions, all, you know, topics, like affirmative teams tend to win more. I think like there's no harm in like settling the playing field a little bit for the neg team and give them greater ground to like do stuff outside of that. So I think that plan, they call that plan plus, where it's the plan and then something else on top of it. I think that that should not necessarily be permeable ground if it is, especially if it is a non-topical counterplan. So I think it was probably created. Yeah, maybe, and you maybe know the history of it better than me, but like where negative teams would just come up with some really inventive, completely off the wall counterplan that was always more important, and that was kind of that's how I heard the story goes of where the permutation came from. Was that like negative teams would just run like some completely ridiculous like build orphanages in sub-Saharan Africa, and the government team is like told to like, I don't know, make better roads. It's like, well, okay, I guess we're not solving for, you know, orphans in sub-Saharan Africa, but we do make roads more efficient. We're like, yeah, you suck. Our solvency is better on the neg side, so we win. And that's where the advent of the permutation came from, of like, well, we can make roads better and then also build orphanages. Like we can do both, and therefore it's a bigger thing. So like, I get that. I don't know. I guess I still feel that that gives the affirmative side a little too much power. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that like when you're given the topic, if you're on the negative, you should be spending time trying to figure out topical reasons on the negative. You know what I mean? You should be thinking of negative arguments, topical negative arguments, so that they'd be directly refuting it. The one I like to use as an example came up recently is like gun control. Like, let's say that you know you're on the affirmative, and someone comes up and says, "Well, the assault weapons ban won't solve, but what will solve is background checks," and that doesn't really prove that an assault weapons ban is disadvantageous. You know what I mean? It's like you're not like proving that there's another way to also solve like some like gun related violence. You know what I mean? Like remember, we're on the affirmative, right? So we're kind of, you know, we're arguing that there's gun related violence and that gun control can actually solve that. And so if you come up and say, oh, we have a background checks counter plan, it's like, well, that really doesn't disprove that we should have the assault weapons ban. It doesn't prove that the assault weapons ban is disadvantageous, that there's something else. And so technically we could ban assault weapons and run background checks. There's nothing preventing us from doing that. So basically the reason I like the perm is that it forces the negative to kind of return to the topic. You know, that you have to explain what's, or just, and when you talk about topical counterplans, it could be competitive. You could have like a permutation, like, you know, it would say it doesn't matter if it's topical or not, just whether or not there's a forced choice between the counterplan and the plan. You cannot do both at the same time.
Okay. And that's, I think that a clever counterplan, like when teams come up with a solidly competitive and on like something actually meaty, right? It's like competitive in terms of time frame, competitive in terms of, you know, funding mechanism, in terms of agency, or, you know, things that it is that makes it impossible to do both. I think funding's honestly kind of a really cheap cop out. Like that was, if ever we like didn't want to do the extra mental work and we came up with a good topical counter plan, we'd be like, oh, we're going to use their same funding. We only have the funds to do one of these things, so we're just going to use that same funding, which is very half-assed. I rarely see it actually win rounds. But even still, finding some, you know, meaningful, good solvency, right? or some meaningful competition, or a net benefit as to like why it would actually be worse to do both things than to do just one plan individually. And that's where sometimes if you come up with a really solid disadvantage that can be paired with a counter plan that does not link into that disadvantage. So sometimes you can have them as just competitively or that they're not mutually exclusive, but they are competitively different, and therefore, like, you know, it doesn't make sense to do both.
Right. So competition doesn't mean that well, I am using the forced choice thing, I think, a little bit too much. You're right. The competitive doesn't necessarily mean mutually exclusive. Competitive includes so if there is a forced choice between plan and counter plan, that means they are mutually exclusive. That is one type of competition. But you're right. Comparative advantage is another type. And honestly, I think that's way more realistic. Like, I think that's way more real world plan versus counter plan type stuff. So like even with the assault weapons ban versus background checks, that you could do the assault, you could say you could run a disadvantage. I think a really easy one would be a politics disadvantage of the assault weapons ban. You know what I mean? Like they you know, there's a big rallying behind the assault weapons ban. It's somehow symbolic that if they ban those things, they're coming for your guns type of thing. But the background checks don't have as much pushback. So the counter plan does not trigger a politics disadvantage, only the plan, or the perm does. The perm does because you're still banning assault weapons. It's not like it counteracts that, you know what I mean? And so that is, in my view, I think that's way more likely to be realistic. I think it's really hard for you to find mutually, like truly mutually exclusive counter plans.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And there's and sometimes, you know, teams will get really creative and will come up with cool ways to do it. But you're totally right. I think it is a little more real world. It normally requires some like very strange wording or timing or agents in order to make something truly mutually exclusive. It usually takes some out of the box finagling from a policy standpoint. So when that happens in a round, though, I will still very frequently see government teams, and I will coach my teams to say the same thing, that we're going to perm this anyways because it's the test of competition. So that's like the one of the scripted things that we teach affirmative teams is to they say counterplan, you say perm, counterplan, perm, counterplan, perm. Like it's just one of those like call and response things. And it's a test of competition. So it forces the member of opposition to prove why a perm is not actually better, or why it's not doable. It just puts more weight and more burden on the MO that already has a ton of ink to cover typically by that point. So I understand from a tactical perspective, like why that's done, but I feel like I rarely see that actually win things. Like a perm on test of competition. Like I have lost on it before because I didn't get to like why the perm didn't work out as an MO, but that is rarely something that I think rounds come down to.
Yeah, and especially in that gun control one, you're right, like, okay, so the test has failed because the politics disadvantage makes that, it's like your perm, it can't work that way, and like you have to prove how it attaches to both of them equally. But I do want to talk about some of the like cookie cutter perms that I love. You know what I mean? And so like being the counter plan that you choose one sort of just kind of go for that. So let me get an example. Like they banned the death penalty. You're like, okay, the only thing that is now subject to death penalty is if you're convicted of serial murder, because there's overwhelming evidence that like there is like pretty much zero chance that you're going to be rehabilitated for that. You're going to die in prison anyway. I like that one. I do like that one because but the other one that I think more people like is allowing people to voluntarily choose like to be put to death.
Oh, got it. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, those people exist. They're very, very, very few, but there's people. It's like, Timothy McVeigh, like for he waived all his appeals, went straight to the death penalty. You know what I mean? It's like, and a lot, and that's what also led to like the serial killers thing, is that there's a lot of serial killers who like kind of kill for the thrill of it, and once they're caught, they're kind of like, can we just end this now? Because I'm good. You know, I'm done.
Yeah, I do see, as far as some other cookie cutter ones, I see time delay counterplans as sometimes they're not especially sexy, but I have seen them very well done. If there's a good reason for like,
yeah,
you know, the government team most regularly says like, you know, time frame on this now, we're going to implement this policy right now. But if there is, you know, an administration change, or if there is some, you know, funding thing that is coming to an end, or if there is something new that is already coming about, like if there's, you know, kind of a waiver in inherency of like this thing might solve itself or something like that. I've seen some effective justifications for a time delay counterplan where it's like, we're going to do the plan, but we're not going to do it right now. There's a good example of mutually exclusive. You cannot do the plan now and also do it later. So that is by nature a mutually exclusive. But so that is one category, one camp of counterplan that's a plan inclusive counterplan. And I see those as like the most frequent, I would say like intermediate to advanced negative strategy of like whatever they do, we're going to come in, change one piece, and that's it. That's a plan inclusive counterplan. And that is like your kind of par for the course, beginning to intermediate open level debate strategy, I feel like.
Yeah, like so on one level, like, and so remember, we want to make sure we're talking about like perm. So like if you're doing a time delay counterplan, I tried. Why would? Am I back?
I've just been nodding and smiling. You froze for a bit. You said the thing that you need to know about time delay counterplans is
perfect. Is that so? Think about running the perm anyway. Think about running it. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, what's the big deal? What's the disadvantage to running it now and running it later? You know, like hopefully they got themselves a disadvantage to it. But sometimes like those ridiculous, like when somebody runs like a constitutional like disadvantage. I guess is a little off topic, but I'm kind of like, run the plan anyway, and you'll get 3 years of benefits before it gets through the Supreme Court, even if it does get struck down. You know what I mean? It's like, and so I kind of think about that on the same procedural levels. It's kind of like, okay, so what's the big deal if we run it twice? You know what I mean? Like for instance, consultation counterplans.
Yeah, I was gonna say consultation counterplan is a fun one. Like that one I like, and I feel like I don't think it's as popular anymore, because I think to do it well, I feel like it kind of has to be backed with some theory. You need to have some good explanation. So we would always pair that with like a Paulo Freire, like the Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of like when you have a monologic type of kind of almost dictatorial plan, you end up with the people resenting it. No one ever likes it. No real change comes from anything but the grassroots level. So like we'd have a bunch of theory talking on like why a top-down approach does not work when policymaking, and then it needs to be something collaborative. So like a dialogic approach, or like the opposite of the banking method if you're going the Freire route. Mm-hmm. So that would be the theory that we would build in to say a consultation is better because it gives agency to whatever party is being affected by this policy, of like, do they want this thing to happen? There's been so many times that the government would pass some policy because it's supposed to fix some problem, think like Clinton era welfare, and it does the exact opposite because it really was completely disconnected from the folks it was supposed to help. So a consultation counterplan, and then you have to, of course, ask the question of binding or non-binding, right? So if it's a non-binding, you can just do the plan anyways, regardless of whatever the other side says. But a binding consultation counterplan says that if the other side disagrees with the plan, whoever it is you're consulting with, you do nothing, and you do not do the plan. So you're left with status quo.
Yeah. So, and like I would respond to that and say, like, way consultation like works isn't always going in there and say, oh, okay, so everybody knows this is binding from day one, right? Okay, we're all good with that. It's like, that's not how shit really works in the world, right? It's like, we sit down so you can do the consultation, and if they don't want to do welfare, Clinton era welfare reform, you say, well, in the end, even if they don't want to, if the people that we're consulting are against it, we can't afford to keep going the way we're going. So I guess we're just going to have a flawed solution rather than no solution. Huh. You're right. You see what I'm saying? The perm still works. You know, you're kind of like, I'm down with consulting people, but if they don't want to do it, we still have to do plan. Like, we can't afford not to. You know, like, if you've set up your harms well enough, you've got to set that up in the affirmative, though.
Sure. Yeah, so and that's where it's sticky ground, right? It's sticky ground for the negative side, because like you are running the risk of, and you'll have to defend, because it's still a debate. Like, you will have to defend the possibility and probability of status quo, like of nothing changing, and you just get the status quo.
Right. Right. Because I would stick the negative. I'm kind of like, listen, like they're going to say, well, they will agree to this. It's like, well, then the perm solves. You know what I mean? Because like as soon as we consult them, then they're good. And they're like, but if it's binding, then it works better. Like, how does that work better? You know what I mean? It's like what part of the consultation is different? You know what I mean? That what happened during these things that made this a success and that a failure? I don't get it, you know? And so
yeah,
forcing them into that, I think the perm makes them talk about that. It's kind of like, if you're really going to go for this pedagogy of the oppressed, then you got to say that is like, we're going to have that or nothing.
Yeah. So I think there are, I totally hear you. And I don't think we actually saw many people that would, because we would regularly kind of go that route. And we rarely saw people that would permit, because they would just get to your point of like, well, that's ridiculous. Like, what if nothing happens? And then we're left with the squo, and that's it. So they wouldn't, because they were, I don't know if they just didn't want to engage with like the theory, or if they're like, that's just a stupid idea. Like, it doesn't actually get anything. Hey, there we go. Thinking back.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would really see perm happen to those. So we would just kind of go hard for the theory of it, of like, they're just trying to push through some policy. They are, you know, like coffee farmers in the rainforest. Like, they want to clear cut. Video, I thought it was kind of again, but like to plant coffee, when it turns out that like if you consult anyone that lives there, they know that coffee likes to grow in the shade. And like, we wouldn't be doing this stupid plan if we knew some of the basic, you know, fundamentals of what's going on the ground. Like, consult the actual people that know it before passing this stupid plan. So that was some of the examples where we would just go like, no, this plan probably has significant enough flaws because it's coming from a place separated. But you're right, like that's still not a perfect solution. Like, that doesn't really get to the heart of it sometimes. So some of the other things, like getting into real squirrely territory, have you seen negative teams run multiple counter plans?
It's usually I want to think that's kind of a novice thing. Maybe, you know, like maybe they've been debating for a number of years or something, but I haven't seen too many upper level debaters running multiple counter plans. I can't even think of one example, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So this is very clearly like a subject, but I've been trying to learn from our far smarter debate coaches at SDSU and teammates a few times of conditionality, or condo is like a much more popular topic now. And like, there's a lot of teams that will have theory of whether it's good or bad or whatever. And it kind of just allows, my basic understandings, allows negative teams to have kind of competing positionality. So they can really be like backing one kind of direction of argument through a counter plan or through a disadvantage or through a critique. And then they can have a totally different advocacy, but hold both at the same time, because their examples, like the negative side is allowed everything except the resolution as their ground. So it is not contradictory to have both of these positions. We just tell you as the affirmative, you know, pick your poison, which one you want to go for.
Yeah.
We can still have multiple of these. I feel like that same logic, I'm down for that. Like, I get it. I can, I wrap my head around it enough to understand that. I think that should give merit to like, sweet, run counter plans in different directions and make the government team like follow one.
I suppose so. I think maybe the main problem is just the time allocation, because the thing about counterplans is that you have to, so in order for you to like beat back a perm, you have to have some sort of disadvantage. Like, that's how competition is really built. Competition isn't built necessarily within the counterplan text. It's built by having a disadvantage to the plan that doesn't link to the counterplan. And so if you're running a full disadvantage, in my opinion, it's like 2 minutes long. You know what I mean? It's like you have to, for a fully developed research source-cited plan with all the theory and explanation, it's like you to it. And it looks like I froze again, but I'm going to keep on going. And then you have to explain like at least a minute of counterplan text, mandates, specifications, and a little bit of like explanation why it can't be permed. So like, I mean, if you're doing 2 counterplan, you have time in a 6 to 8 minute speech to do 2 of them, and then maybe another position. But maybe, you know what I mean? It's like I guess my thought was kind of like it's just unlikely to have 2 freaking good counterplans in the first place. You know what I mean? It's hard enough to come up with one. It's hard, you know what I mean? But yeah, theory wise, I think that I think that I think that there's a small opening to run multiple counterplans, right? It just, I can't think of a single example where that's the best strategy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it paints very different worlds. I have not seen it myself. I haven't even heard of it, but I still was just like thinking, I've thought about it when conditionality was explained to me. I was like, well, that seems like maybe a direction you could go. Like if you actually have advocacy that are real, like in-round fiat advocacies. And I would probably make the claim of like, hey, government team over here gets to both fiat the plan and they get extra fiat with the opportunity of a perm. Give us 2 fiats as well. First fiat, we're going to go all the way in. Second fiat, we're going to crash the system, right? Like, and just do both and make the other team, defend both. I think that at the end of the day, what I really like about the perm discussion is that it forces you to evaluate, I mean, at a core level, like policy, is this a good policy or is it a bad policy when presented with something else? Because like it's not required in any given sense to like you have to run a counterplan. There's plenty of times you can just have straight off case and talk about the plan itself and evaluate its merits and drawbacks. But I think as soon as you present an alternative, that really changes the debate that oftentimes will take some of the spotlight off of the plan, where you don't get as deep into solvency points or advantages and just, where it goes. It ends up becoming like, is this good when in comparison to a counterplan? So it's almost an important strategic decision of, is it worth, like if you have a good expectation that the affirmative team is going to have a pretty solid plan, is it really worth posing a counterplan? Is yours going to be as good or better? Right. Or if you know that the affirmative team is just going to like blip out something stupid and not think it through, maybe it's worth not having a counterplan and just burn that thing down. Like if you know that it's already a complicated resolution on, when it's given like, they're going to pass HR 21311 and that's going to do this thing. And I know that they're not going to be well prepped out for it. And you can just tear it down from a research perspective. Then yeah, don't introduce a counterplan and open yourself up to perms and other things like that. I think it opens the door for more ground for the affirmative. So I think there's some kind of strategic decisions to be made in there. As well as on the affirmative side, the strategic decision of when I've seen teams like, nope, we're not going to perm. Your counterplan's a bad idea. So sure, compare the two. We're going to win that. I've seen that done very well. Like that just becomes quite a posture, and it's impressive when done effectively. So I've seen teams that are really good win on just straight that.
So conditionality is also a term of permutations in and of itself, not just about counterplans, right? And so like conditionality being whether or not you are advocating the perm or whether or not it's, like you said, it's just a test of competition, all right? And so like that is usually how I hear the term conditionality. I also hear the term dispositionality. And yeah, okay. Here's dispositionality as I heard it. It's kind of like, listen, we're only doing a test of competition unless or we're advocating. No, this is dispositionalities for the counterplan, right? It's like we're going to advocate this counterplan, but we reserve the right to kick it unless you run a disadvantage against the counterplan, and then we'll stick with it. That's dispositionality. I don't know where the hell they came up with these terms, and like honestly, like half the time it feels like we're making up rules of debate, based off of what these people think is fair or those people think is fair at the time, which is why
I think that's what sticks too.
Yeah, I think I prefer like what is applicable in like real world scenarios, including debate, but like what is Like, where do we see these types of arguments elsewhere? All right. I don't see things like dispositionality in, like, theoretically, I don't see the theory of dispositionality anywhere but debate. And then I start questioning how useful is that that theory. If like we made it up just to have tournaments, like what the hell's the point?
Yeah, that goes for all of this activity, isn't it?
Yeah.
What is the point? But good stuff. I'm glad we get to tear all the way through perms.
Yeah. Well, maybe Matt will be back next week after he does his reenactment. Okay. But
I hope he wins.
That's our thoughts on the perm. Okay. We'll be back next week. I'm Jared. This is Tim. We'll see you in the future, everybody.